Have you ever wondered what faith is? I often have. And, at different times in my life, faith has meant different things to me. And I think that faith is pretty clearly lined out in the Bible for us, but oftentimes it's used very generically and it's not very practical. But there is one part in the Bible that talks very specifically about what exactly faith is on a day-to-day level, and that's what I kind of want to talk to you about for a minute. So if you look in James chapter 2, starting in verse 14, James here is talking to Jewish people scattered abroad who are fighting with their newfound freedom from legalism and from the law of Moses. And what he's trying to explain to these people here is that your faith, yes, it is belief and it is truth that you need to believe in, but true faith is not just saying I believe and moving on from life. He's trying to explain to these people that once you have this faith in something, that you're willing to follow it. And so what I started with was I looked into some of the definitions of faith. And I have my little notebook here if you can't see it in the camera, but faith is in the Bible here in this passage two Greek words. One is piston and one is pistos, and they carry the term of belief, and not just a temporary belief, but a long-term belief, something that you're willing to fight for throughout your life. And if you look in some of the old writings and what people use the word faith for back in the time of the Bible being written, it means assent of the mind to the truth of what is declared by another man without any further proof. And that perfectly explains what the Bible is and what faith that we have in it. There's also, biblical definitions of faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And all of those things are very true. But I wanted to really sit on that definition from the Old English, if you will, of faith, where we believe on other people without further evidence. And what James was trying to explain to these people here, especially with all the other writings that they had available to them, was they didn't have to go seeking for further evidence that God was who he said he was, but that the faith that they had could be true just off of what they knew of Jesus and of God already. And there's many other passages in the Bible that explain that also. You could go through and look at many different things on faith. Just to name a few of the verses, John chapter 3 is a great one. Romans 10, 13 through 17, Acts 2:21, Joel 2:32. Those are all ones that I just found. But this faith here is the key to our salvation and the key to our relationship with God. And what I don't think that a lot of people understand at face value is that James and Paul are not trying to argue against each other. They're really just fighting the same battle from two different directions, if that makes sense. Paul, when he wrote that faith is not, or salvation is not by works, lest any man should boast, he's not writing to the same people that James is. He's trying to write to the people that are in desperate need of knowing that their faith is sufficient. He's writing to those people that need to know that sacrifices are no longer needed because they have a perfect sacrifice. While James is writing to the people on the other side of the spectrum, like I mentioned earlier, that are completely out of proportions on what they are supposed to believe in terms of what they should and should not do as a professed Christian. And I think that's something that we see true today in our lives also. We see people in and out of church that think that coming to church is their solution to get to heaven, or that their charitable works or their giving and everything is what's going to get them into heaven. But really and truthfully, all we have to have is faith unto salvation. A faith and a belief in the Bible is something that we're obedient to. It's something that changes our direction to where we want to seek to be more like Christ, who is our example of faith in God when he was on this earth. And so a lot of times people will get those two things confused and think that we are supposed to follow after the Bible's commands to get saved, but that's not the case. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. But James, on the other hand, is talking to people that we've also seen in our time that are what people would call hypocrites. I'm sure many of you have talked to people that were discouraged to come to church because they knew people that were living worse lives than they were by morality standards that were going to church. And those people will have to answer for that also. But that's what James is trying to warn against, is that you can't just live any way you want to after you having professed faith, that the works that we do are what come out and show others who we are. And so to get into the works part of James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26, as I mentioned earlier, the word works in this passage is ergon. It's the definition of that is an act or a deed. That would be pretty simple. We can kind of all understand that. It's more of a everyday, recurring, repetitive action type thing. The works that we're doing here is not something that we're trying to go and sacrifice bulls and goats, or sprinkle blood, or go and cleanse ourselves in the Jordan River, or 7 times or whatever, like people had to do in the Old Testament. That covenant's gone. We have Jesus that's already came and died for us, and we can have faith in him that his word is true. And one thing that I think is very important when you talk about faith is that we do seek to obey his commands and to follow his will. And that's where the works come in. It's very different to different people depending on what part of life you're in, and your responsibilities and roles change and blossom throughout life. You can read about that in Ecclesiastes, or Paul talks about it in Corinthians also. And I think that what you're called to do is not going to always stay the same. But it's important that when you do have that calling on your life to fill in some work, that you should do that. And that's how you are what Abraham in Genesis was justified unto others. And when it talks about justified and justified by his works here in this passage, Abraham was already justified in the sight of God earlier whenever he had committed himself unto Jesus or unto God, and went over into Israel, into the promised land, and took that over for his own, and believed in God, and it was counted for him righteousness. It talks about that in Genesis chapter 15. And that's all justification is having some semblance of righteousness in the sight of God. And we get that through our belief and faith in Jesus Christ. And so Paul there, because of his belief in God, also was counted righteousness in his name. And so when you go over to what James talks about, when Abraham was meant to sacrifice his son, he went in faith that God would take care of him and the boy. He knew that God had promised him this child, and that no matter what happened, that one way or another, this boy was still going to be with him when he came off the mountain. And that had to mean something to the people around him, and show his faith to others, not just let it be hidden, but make it so that other people could recognize that faith and accept it for themselves. And so I think, to wrap this up a little bit, James talks a lot about living in dead faith. Dead faith to me comes out in two different ways. It's kind of the inverse of what we just talked about with Abraham, where he was willing to be obedient to God's call no matter what. But this dead faith of people who are truly saved is people who are rejecting growth and rejecting what God wants them to do in their life, and so others are unable to see God through them because of that. And then, secondly, you have a dead faith of the people like James is talking to. A better way to put it may be that it's a passing or fleeting faith, something that's temporary. They needed something more permanent and grounded. And so that living faith is found all throughout the Bible, but there's also examples of dead faith. If you want more examples on living faith, you can look at Rahab, like here, or the children of Israel that were in the book of Daniel and thrown into the fire, or the Hebrew women that protected the Hebrew boys, male children, from the Pharaoh in Egypt at the beginning of Exodus. There's many places throughout the Bible, and I'm sure there's several in the New Testament that I just don't have off the top of my head to tell you, but a great example of dead faith, one that is passing and won't get you anywhere, is Nicodemus. He had faith enough to come and to know that Jesus was of God, but he didn't have the faith to save himself and to change his ways and to follow after Jesus. And that's what we really need to have in our lives. And so I wanted to make this. It's the first time. I hope I get better with the videos, but I thought it would be a great example of for others that may not be as familiar with the faith, or in the future, if someone watches this that's unfamiliar with faith altogether, that they could get a help out of it and hopefully be saved. So I thank you for that. If you enjoy it, like and subscribe, I guess. We're on that train now. And most importantly, just pray over it and see what you get out of the lesson. And thank you for watching.